Good morning or good afternoon. My name is Paul Gardner. I'm the administrator for the Clean Water Council, and my presentation this afternoon is about our first ever strategic plan at the Clean Water Council and the Clean Water Fund recommendations for fiscal 19 or fiscal 22 and 23. There we go. Here's what I'd like to share with you. First, the strategic plan, their funding recommendations, an update on soil and water conservation district funding, response to some feedback we've received about monitoring funding versus implementation projects, and also how to keep in touch and to keep track of what we're doing in the year to come. I wanted to mention that at the Clean Water Council, we solicited a lot of stakeholder feedback over the last year and a half. I started the job in January of 2019, and the first thing I really wanted to do is talk to the stakeholders who have a particular interest in the Clean Water Fund, watershed districts included. And I just wanted to see what people had been feeling over the last 10 years with the existence of the Clean Water Fund. And we got some frank and direct feedback, which was actually sometimes a little painful, but quite helpful in the end. And there were three major conclusions that the council drew from that experience, and it really had to do with transparency and communication. The first is we just heard from a lot of people, including folks at the Capitol, that they did not really have a good sense of what the outputs and outcomes of the Clean Water Fund have been. They know that there's been a lot of money spent. It usually goes through state agencies to start with, but they didn't really know how close we were getting to any goals. And we have some goals, but not a lot. And so people were just confused. We also found that we had a lot of questions about how the Clean Water Council makes its decisions to recommend how to spend the Clean Water Fund. And while I think the council did make efforts at letting people know, we could really step on that or step on the gas a little bit more and showing you how it's done. So we really stepped up efforts this time around. And third, and this is probably the one I've spent the most time on, is we had a lot of people saying that they're not really sure how all the programs funded by the Clean Water Fund fit together. You will see several dozen programs that we fund if you look at our recommendations. And it's not always clear. Sometimes we just use lingo that isn't always logical. Or one group or agency is familiar with what one batch of programs is about, but not another set, even though that everything kind of fits together. So we did not do a very good job of articulating that, and we're just about to issue our new report for the recommendations this week, and that'll be online. And so the report we wrote for that is meant to answer that question: how does everything fit together? One date on everybody's mind when it comes to the Clean Water Fund is 2034, when the legacy amendment expires. That date is coming faster than it looks. We are not in the business of advocacy for an electoral outcome after 2034 on the council. However, we do want to provide accountability for what we are spending money on. And in that process, a lot of people have said, gosh, we have 14 years. And as I did the math, that actually we need 10 years because the legislature that is elected in 2030 is probably the last one that will be able to make a decision about putting a renewal on the ballot in 2032, since they have to be there on even numbered years, and the legislature in 2033 appropriates money for fiscal 35, which is the fiscal year after 2034. So we really have about 10 years to make it clear what we've been doing and what we need to do. So we're trying to demonstrate what will be complete by 2034 so people have a good handle on that. All of this feedback led to us creating our first ever strategic plan, which was approved in, let's say, April of 2020. I won't read through all of these, but we have four major goals listed in our strategic plan that all have to do with drinkable, fishable, and swimmable water. There are some audacious goals that we decided to lay out. things that someone at the in the general public would be very able to figure out without much trouble. So I call them rates and dates, particular outcomes that we would want to happen by a certain date. For example, out of the 40 strategies or so that we have listed in the strategic plan, we have a couple here that you'd recognize. One is to protect and restore 200,000 acres in the upper Mississippi River Basin. Another is to protect 400,000 acres in many hundreds of wellhead protection areas by 2034, which I think most people are not familiar with. And then fund half of the drinking water source protection plans that are for those wellhead areas by 2034. We're looking at septic system compliance. We'd have a stretch goal of 90%. We're already at about 80. We'd like to see 5 million acres of cover crops. The Clean Water Fund isn't the only source to make that happen, obviously. Federal money takes a big chunk of that, as well as landowner contributions with people doing that on their own. We do have a good proxy measure for good best management practices in agriculture with the Ag Water Quality Certification Program that I'm sure you're familiar with. And the Department of Ag thinks that we can get about maybe a third to a quarter of our row crop acres in that program by 2034, or by 2030, excuse me. And then we have about 30 other additional strategies, which are perhaps not PowerPoint worthy at this moment. We did identify something in the strategic plan called portfolio mix. That is really our shorthand to give people some indication on how much we want to spend on different categories. I have gotten a lot of feedback about monitoring and assessment. This is when we're testing our waters and doing the 10-year cycle of monitoring and the like. We at the Clean Water Council decided to cap that funding at 15%. That's about where we were spending before, but that number has been shrinking a little bit. But we wanted to give people an indication that that is not a growth area. As more comprehensive watershed management plans are done through One Watershed, One Plan, an increasing number of money from the Clean Water Fund will go through their non-competitive watershed-based implementation funding over time through 2034, and we have a timetable in the strategic plan that lists how much we ought to put into that, into implementation generally, as we get closer to 2034. And I should note that there are other implementation type of projects that aren't of the watershed-based variety. So the Ag Water Quality Certification Program is one. The septic system compliance enhancement is another. So those are a couple of examples, but when you add them all up, we're spending about 2/3 of the fund on those projects presently in our next set of recommendations. The state constitution does require us to spend 5% primarily on drinking water, only on drinking water as they call it. And we also wanted to spend at the council another 20% indirectly for things that may not be obviously drinking water, but protect drinking water sources. Next, I'll jump into our recommendations for fiscal 2022 and 23. This is for the state budget year that starts, or the budget biennium that starts July 1, 2021. And this week we are posting the recommendations. The report to the legislature with those recommendations is due December 1st. I'm filming here on November 29th, so we haven't submitted them yet. By the time you see this on December 2nd, they will have been submitted, and I think they might be on the web by the end of the week. The amount of money available this time around is $220 million and change. That's after a 5% reserve is taken out as required by law. That revenue estimate that I mentioned may change this. Usually I'm more pessimistic, but I'm actually a little more optimistic because sales tax revenue has been coming in much higher than expected from the May forecast, which was very much a doom and gloom forecast. So the picture for 2021 may not be as dire, or 22-23 may not be as dire as we thought, but we'll see. But the $220 million number is down from $261 million that was spent or appropriated in 2021. So I just wanted to temper expectations. Here is a general breakdown of where the the council's recommendations are. We did go through many months of hearing proposals and giving public a chance to comment. So we did receive multiple letters from MAUD, which I'll get to in a minute. But projects, the implementation part of the Clean Water Fund comprises more than 2/3 of all the money that would be appropriated if our recommendations were completely approved. That does include those watershed-based implementation grants, competitive grants, easements, all the technical assistance that's done through Bowser, Ag, and Department of Health and a few other places. Enhanced county septic system compliance through the PCA, the Point Source Implementation Grant Program, Ag Water Quality Certification, and drinking water grants to municipalities. Those range from $5,000 to remove an abandoned gasoline storage tank to much more complex projects. You can see our monitoring and assessment at 13.6. That's less than the 15% cap that we set. The RAPS, which is going to be wrapping up, no pun intended, by 2023, that's at 11%. But you see the implementation items there further down. And we have a very modest number for administration. Breakdown by agency. Of particular interest to watershed districts is the Bowser is getting the lion's share here of the funding. We also have the PCA with just under 1/5 of the money. We do have some going to the U of M, Met Council, Public Facilities Authority, DNR, Ag, and Health. I wanted to mention a couple of key indicators that we were looking at as part of our strategic plan, and this is response to feedback we've gotten at the Capitol in particular. We have people say that we don't spend a lot on drinking water. And so I went through an exercise with the agencies to figure out which projects and programs actually support the protection of our drinking water sources. And the Constitution requires 5%, but after we got through this math, I discovered that we're spending 1/5 of the Clean Water Fund that exclusively helps drinking water. So you can have a program like easements, a particular type of easements, not all of it, but maybe 10% of an easement program would have a direct impact on drinking water spending because it might be within a wellhead protection area. Certainly all the grants that the health department is making related to drinking water is a key part of this. But so our numbers are kind of backwards. We wanted 5% only for drinking water sources and 20% that's indirectly benefiting groundwater or drinking water. And actually the numbers are flipped. We're spending more than we thought directly on drinking water source protection. So that's good news. As I mentioned, monitoring and assessment is lower than the cap of 15%. Oops, this number is incorrect here. State FTEs in Greater Minnesota, that's 52%, not 52. I also asked agencies if they could indicate where state employees funded by the Clean Water Fund are located. And I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that most of them are in Greater Minnesota, where they are more likely to provide direct technical assistance or some other interface with you or with landowners, which is a positive thing. So they're not all in St. Paul. Also, much to my surprise, I asked if agencies in our process this year could indicate what percentage of their funding left the agency. The agencies get the money and then they distribute it through grants, through easements, through technical assistance and the like. And almost 2/3 of the money is actually passed through to other entities, including watershed districts. And because of our budget situation, MAUD has told us that we shouldn't fund everything. And for that reason and others, we did reduce the number of funded items in the Clean Water Fund from 67 to 58. We get a lot of questions about soil and water conservation district funding. The council did not want to set the precedent of recommending money for soil and water conservation districts, although we recognize that the legislature may choose to do that. But we wanted to have a conversation with our state agencies and their commissioners to see what we could do to come up with a package deal. We know that some clean water funds will be used in 22-23. The question is, are those going to be permanent solutions or temporary solutions? I've gotten burned a little bit by being a little too candid about what people are thinking about, so I can't say too much here, but we're further than we ever have been in the last couple of biennia by having commissioners talking directly to groups like MAUD, like Maskwood, to figure out what approaches would be acceptable. And we know that the general fund is not an option for 22-23 because of the likely deficit. And so we're getting closer, but as of November 29th, we don't have a total solution. But this solution, this package that we think will come forward from the executive branch and with some buy-in from legislators, that will not be part of the Clean Water Council recommendations because those are due December 1. But we would see something coming soon, I hope, but it won't be part of the governor's official budget as of yet. I do want to mention that legislators have noticed this, as I did when I served in the Minnesota House, that we do have a lot of local government units responsible for water. That's not anybody's fault. That's just a fact. We have municipalities, counties, watershed districts, soil and water conservation districts, water management organizations, well over 200 different entities. And whether that is a good idea or not, it's not for me to say, but a lot of people in the legislature on both sides of the aisle have expressed some interest in at least asking the question of whether we ought to invest in fewer LGUs for water. And that could, I assume, include something like SWCDs and watershed districts, either consolidating or a couple of SWCDs with low population creating a watershed district. I don't know how that will come out. I'm just letting you know that there's some interest in the legislature on attaching strings to any money for SWCDs that might include some proscriptive language, like something like consolidation. I do get a lot of questions about monitoring, so I did want to bring this up. And I get these questions from watershed districts. The basic question being, why do we spend as much as we do on monitoring when we finish the first 10-year cycle of all 80 major watersheds? Are we just going to test another 10 years the same way? And should we do that? Fair question. And I always like to figure out where our money is being used. So I asked a lot of nosy questions on your behalf, let's say. So one item is that as a percentage of the total spending of the Clean Water Fund, monitoring continues to go down. We're down at 13.6%. The total number is going up slightly, but as a percentage of the fund, it's been going down. In the second 10-year monitoring cycle for all major watersheds, the PCA is cutting the number of monitoring sites by a third. So we're already spending less there. That allows them to maintain the minimum amount of data collection to maintain compliance with EPA requirements for TMDLs. 1/3 of the money that is being proposed for the next 10-year cycle is in response to local and state partner requests. So it could be a state agency or a watershed district asking for more data to see if a project is actually working. So you may have done a major project and you need some data to figure out whether it's getting the results that you wanted. This is something I hadn't thought about, but I've been told that municipalities are very interested in accurate and up-to-date monitoring data because their point source permits for things like wastewater treatment plants rely on accurate data. And if it turns out there is less of a nutrient downstream of a wastewater treatment plant because of work that you and others are doing, then they would not have to spend as much money to upgrade their wastewater treatment plants. So it could save tens of millions of dollars in some cases for cities if they have accurate data. So that's another reason that we maintain a certain level of monitoring. We also can't delist waters from the impaired waters list unless we have 2 data sets within the last 10 years. I believe that's federal requirement, but obviously our objective is to delist waters off the impaired waters list, but we can't actually do that without data to prove it. There is also a lot of interest at the Capitol and within agencies on more pollutant trading. This gets to the idea of wastewater treatment plants and municipalities being able to get a better deal financially and reduce nutrients by the required amount by paying you or farmers to do best management practices upstream of a wastewater treatment plant as an alternative. That kind of pollutant trade requires a lot of data to make sure that you're actually allocating costs properly. And finally, instead of using consultants as was done in the first 10-year cycle, in many cases, the second 10-year cycle is actually having money going to local partners, such as the Soil and Water Conservation District, to do that work. I'm almost to the end here. We do also spend money on planning. You'll see that we're spending 11% on the RAPS program in 22-23. I just want to mention that the spending for that is declining. The RAPS are supposed to all be done by 2023 by law. And I've heard people use the phrase that we're doing a second cycle of RAPS, as if we're going to redo RAPS just like we've done with monitoring. And again, I got to ask lots of nosy questions, and the answer is that if a RAPS has to be updated, there are edits done in response to new data. We're not doing a new edition, it's just an edit. So it's usually being done in response to a local request, and I understand some watershed districts are some of the instigators of those requests. And finally, One Watershed, One Plan work is supposed to be done around 2025. So we'll be spending less on RAPS and One Watershed, One Plans very soon, and that frees up more money for projects. And finally, I just wanted to let you know how you can keep in touch. If you Google Clean Water Council Minnesota, you'll find our webpage. You can see our strategic plan. You can sign up for our weekly email bulletin. I'm always happy to get content from watershed districts about things you're doing with a Clean Water Fund. Let's see. We are also working to have a more harmonized approach with communications regarding the Clean Water Fund, and that is really for the benefit of the public. Every agency has its own communication strategy, and there's not always an integration under the umbrella of the Clean Water Fund, and we're going to try and remedy that over the next couple of months. Finally, we are recruiting for a new watershed district position on the Clean Water Council. I understand Maud is going through a vetting process for that as well, and so I'm looking forward to working with somebody new from watershed districts in January. That's all I have, and I understand that I will be here watching myself talk, and then people will have questions in the version of the chat. That's not the right word, but I will end it there, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.